Hi, my name is Charlotte, and this channel is about my attempt to become moderately competent at drawing. This week, I'm going to be walking through a little sketchbook project that I've been working on, mainly in October, in which I aim to learn to draw clothing and the clothed figure. I got interested in this because when I came back to drawing in August after a fairly long break, I decided I wanted to pursue my interest in character design. And as I looked through the types of skills that I would need to do that successfully, I realized that although I've done quite a lot of figure drawing, most of it has been of a fairly classic type, using mainly models who are nude or partially nude. And I don't have a lot of experience of drawing people in everyday clothes or in costumes. To do this, I put together a series of little projects that I thought would help me get started on learning to draw clothes. As always, although I hope you find this interesting and potentially useful, I don't really know what I'm doing, and so this might not be a particularly good way to learn clothes. It's just the way that I've gone about it. So this larger project had 5 subsections. First of all, reviewing fabric folds. I have drawn fabric folds before in some detail, and in fact, one of my favorite pen and ink drawings that I've done so far is a study of some draped fabric. However, I felt really rusty when I came back to this, and adding on the task of trying to render drawings I already wasn't particularly happy with meant that I was mostly really disappointed with my work on this. There are a few studies that turned out okay, and I did enjoy finding a rendering process that I quite liked, which involved laying down a light wash of color with watercolor and then shading with colored pencil. But overall, this felt pretty unsatisfactory as a start to this overall project. Nevertheless, I decided to persevere, and I moved on to the second and longest part of this plan and started work on drawing the various types of clothing direct from reference. For this, I really simply tried to copy references exactly as I saw them directly from images I found on the internet. I approached this fairly systematically, and on the advice of a book I read, I started with simpler parts of garments, specifically sleeves, and then worked up to the types of clothes that have a lot of design details like coats and jackets. And in this section, I actually also did a couple of pages that are out of the norm. I had one page where I looked at how some artists stylized folds in clothes, and I also did a little bit of rendering on just this one page. In the end, I decided I didn't really want the distraction of looking at stylization, looking at rendering while I was learning to draw clothes. So from this point on, everything is just sketches rather than any kind of more finished drawings. After sleeves, I looked at trousers, and after a few pages of that, I looked at shirts and tops, then jackets and coats, and then onto skirts and dresses. I realized later it would have been smarter, or at least more consistent, to practice drawing skirts and dresses after trousers, because it was a definite step back in complexity compared to coats. I also spent a couple of pages on shoes. These little ink and water sketches were from something else I was doing. They ended up getting ripped out of the sketchbook I was working in, and in the absence of anywhere better to put them, I just attached them in here. The final pages of this part of the project are of whole outfits, again drawn directly from reference. Overall, I really enjoyed this part of my project, and I ended up quite liking a lot of these pages, more because of the overall impression they leave rather than like any one specific drawing. In fact, quite a lot of the drawings on any given page aren't particularly good or correct, but I just still really like the overall look. Part 3 of this project was figuring out some more neutral poses. So this is more of a preparation step for part 4, as you'll see. My goal was to fill 2 spreads in my sketchbook with some simple, easy to reproduce figure poses. And I ended up with these 2 spreads. The first includes simple front-facing poses and 3/4 front poses, and then the second spread includes profile and back views and a few simple seated poses. You'll see how I use these 2 spreads in part 4, but first let me show you the preparatory work I did for them. So these very messy pages at the back of my sketchbook were where I was working through finding a variety of neutral poses and picking the ones I liked best. I also played with some other ideas like varying body types, practicing a more active pose that I wanted to use, and then, even though I actually didn't use any of this, I was playing around with multi-character poses, so 2 and 3 people. And that brought me on to part 4, which was going from reference to imagination. And I think this was actually my favorite section of the whole project, and I can imagine doing this little exercise over and over just as a fun thing to do. So in this section, I took an outfit directly from reference, and they're all highlighted with this blue box. Then I used my catalog of simple poses and tried to imagine how the outfit would look from various angles and configurations. My goal here was to draw the same garments from several imagined viewpoints and make sure that it was consistent. So that is, it was recognizably the same outfit from drawing to drawing. On the first spread, I drew this little character directly from my product listing for a coat. Then I asked myself what would happen if this little character was wearing the coat loose or walking while wearing it belted. So the second page is a much simpler outfit. It's just a loungewear set. And I think this really shows one of the problems with trying to be consistent. As I was struggling with just drawing this seated pose, I lost track of the fact that the top actually has quite a lot of volume to it, so it's quite loose and baggy. By the time I got to that last drawing, it had become quite fitted. The second spread of this was overall just less successful, I think. The dress is some kind of wildly expensive designer dress, and it wasn't very much fun to draw. Although I like the drawing on the bottom left, I don't think it's actually very accurate to what would happen if you were wearing that dress in that pose. And on the opposite page, you can see me struggling with seated poses and not really being sure how those poses would affect the jacket in particular. I think this is the sort of knowledge you can only build up from drawing from reference, where you're actually seeing a real jacket affected by somebody sitting down. The final part of my project is only a few pages long, but it probably needs the longest explanation. This was really the main point of doing this entire project. So the idea here was to try to explore some really simple costuming ideas for a specific character. So the particular character is one that I created in a very silly story that I wrote many years ago. She's just a secondary character, but she has the most compelling costuming arc of anything that I could think of. So she was the best choice for this mini project. So the character is called Victoria, and the story is set kind of vaguely in the English Regency, so kind of early 19th century. Like I said, it's a really silly story, so the time period is hand-waved throughout, and I probably thought about it in more detail for these drawings than in writing the story itself. So Victoria's costume arc starts with her in England. So she starts off in a classic Regency period gown. So I started off drawing a little marionette and then tried to draw some character/story appropriate poses. Victoria is not meek, so even the one drawing of her sitting demurely on the sofa is meant to be contrasted with her then like flopping down onto the same sofa after visitors have left. And I actually, obviously, as you can tell, struggled with that last drawing because in addition to trying to get the feeling of her body interacting with the sofa appropriately, I really couldn't figure out how a long skirt would behave if you were in this position. So it ended up kind of a mess. So for reasons that really don't merit exploration, Victoria ends up crossing paths with pirates. And as a part of that story, she adopts basic pirate dress when she ends up on board their ship. I wanted it to look like her outfit was borrowed and too big for her and probably had been packed away for a while. So it's a little kind of an older style. So she's wearing long, wide pirate shorts, which are called slops, but they end up being kind of like a midi-length skirt on her, and her shirt is meant to be very full and baggy. And again, unfortunately, I really struggled to get exactly the look I wanted because I didn't have any kind of reference, and I couldn't really figure out how to do it without reference. So the fun action pose I wanted to give her, where she's like hanging off this rope looking out to sea, I couldn't figure out how to get it to look like, she's wearing this too big shirt, the baggy sleeves are falling down her arms because they're too long and she's got them above her head. So I ended up liking these two little drawings on the bottom left a bit more, but they're not actually particularly consistent with my overall idea, which is of this outfit being a little bit too big. So the last spread in this sketchbook has two more parts of Victoria's costuming arc. The first on the left is to show her in a more formal privateer era look. And then finally, even though it's very out of period, I wanted to put her in a golden age pirate outfit, which means more of an early to mid 18th century look rather than 19th. I think overall, there are aspects of these drawings in this costuming project that I really enjoyed and parts that I really struggled with. And while nothing here was kind of wildly successful, and I'm really far from being able to reproduce what I'm seeing in my mind on the page, it was just hugely enjoyable, and I was really glad I had spent time on it. And it definitely points me towards how much fun it will be to do this as I develop more drawing skills. So overall, I learned a huge amount from this project, really glad that I did it, and I hope that you've enjoyed looking through it too. I hope you all have a great creative week, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.